I remember just only last night, Astrid was saying, was recounting a funny scene from The Big Bang Theory. I don't know if any of you watch the show. I don't really watch it, but she was saying how one of the main characters, Sheldon, who is a terribly OCD sort of a person, he was saying that on his weekend he was going to turn his list of enemies into a spreadsheet so that you could search up his list of enemies by name, by position number on the list of enemies, or indeed you could search it up by length of time of the grudge that you were on that list. As we look at this reading, maybe, Peter, could you put just the first page of our Bible reading up again? I'm wondering if maybe you're a bit like Sheldon. Do you have a list of enemies? Do you have a grudge list of people that have hurt you, have offended you, or maybe continually treat you poorly? And then we come to this Bible reading, and Jesus says, if you have ears to hear, then listen up. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Or bless those who curse you, some of the translations have. Isn't that difficult? Isn't it a wonderful thing to sort of ponder and think about? But when we actually think about trying to live it, trying to apply it to the people who've just been really horrible to us, those people who hate us or those people who curse us, it's a really tough one. Abraham Lincoln is quoted as saying, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friend?" I think he's probably learned something of Jesus for him to be able to say that and understand that. It's a great saying to memorise, difficult to live by. The kingdom that Jesus is preaching to his followers and to the listening crowd, as we pick it up, we spent last couple of weeks focusing on Jesus' sermon. Today's passage is aimed at those who would follow Christ, those who would call themselves Christians and try and live his way. But the kingdom that he's preaching about and that he lived is about a glorious, an uproarious, absurd kind of generosity. Think of the best thing that you could do for a person, the very best thing that you could do for somebody. Now think of the worst person and do it for them. Just let your minds wander for a moment. Think of what you would love to have someone do for you. Something that would just be, out of the blue and blessing and wonderful, the most amazing thing you can imagine. Now go and do it for the worst person you can imagine. Think of people to whom you are tempted to be nasty towards, to say spiteful things, or even just to think spiteful things. Now imagine yourself lavishing generosity on them instead. These instructions from Jesus, these few words, even if we focus on them, though the whole of it has the same kind of quality, they have almost a fresh and spring-like quality to them. They seem to sort of bubble up. They're all about new life, bursting forth, a kind of energetic power that we don't always know in ourselves, that doesn't come naturally to us. But when we hear Jesus say them, they're like flowers that burst up through a crack in the concrete, springing forth with colour and vibrancy, vitality that surprises us. How do we tap into that source that makes this kind of living even possible? Maybe we should be asking the question, is it even possible to live like this? And the answer is yes and no. Without Christ, certainly not. But Christ and God are the source of this kind of love, this kind of power that brings new life in places that are dead. Jesus' point when he's preaching about this is that he's not just giving a bunch of rules. As Jewish people, they had already a bunch of rules to live by and to guide the whole of every part of their life. So this is not just another tack-on list of do's and don'ts. It's not about that. The point is not that you could come to the end of a day and say, oh, well, I've ticked that box and I've ticked that box. Now I can put my feet up. I've had a really successful moral day. It's not that kind of a list at all. But rather, they point to kind of immersing and illustrating for those who would follow Christ an attitude of the heart, a lightness of spirit that causes generosity, that brings joy in giving, that really is a lightness of spirit. That we can say, we are free. We give freely. And when we can do that, and I'm hoping that you have experienced it, that lightness of spirit, when you give, when you bless, when you do something for someone else, and it's just incredibly easy and joyful. There's none of the hang-up of, oh, well, I hope they pay me back sometime. I had just a silly little example the other day. I went to Aldi and there was this guy walking out, because if you've been shopping at Aldi, you have to pay for their shopping trolleys. If you've got a gold coin, that's great. If you don't, like this guy, he went in thinking he would get one or two things. He came out literally with his chin on this pile of boxes, walking out past the trolleys like this. And there was a couple of us who said, do you need a hand? Do you want... And I was able to say, look, here, have a $2 coin, and you can put it in the trolley. Now, he refused. He was, which in some ways wasn't the point. That's his choice. He could make 2 trips. It was no big deal. But there's something wonderful about just being able to say, oh, here's an opportunity, and I could do something for somebody I've never met. It's only something small, but it was really easy to do. And there was a bunch of us there who just wanted to help him, and that kind of lightness of spirit, for that to just bubble up within us, day in, day out, hour by hour, it comes from Christ and the love of God. And being able to do that in the face of all that the world throws at us. At the centre of it is one really important thing, that thing that motivates the giving and the caring and the generosity and the freedom of spirit, the colour and the vitality that comes, is a little bit later in the verse when it says, you are to be like this because that is what God is like. So the motivation for trying to even attempt these things, to trying to love enemies, to trying to bless people who are cursing us, it's not a do and a don't and a list of rules. The motivation for that is because that's how God is. That's who God is. And we want to be like God in living our lives, the best that we can. That's our motivation. God is generous to all. God provides good things for all people those who deserve it and those who don't. And God doesn't seem to care. He just wants to provide good things for everyone. God is astonishingly merciful. When we search our own heart, we know our own lives and where we've been and what we've done and where we've come from. Yet we still experience God's grace. We know God is merciful, astonishingly merciful. How can we as his children be less so? And it's only when we know that attitude of God, when we know who God is and his nature of generosity, of mercy, of love in abundance, of this outpouring and giving. When we know that's who God is, then we can be connected to that stream, that power that flows through and bubbles up in us. The source of the spring, if you like, that can gush and flow through us. In many ways, this list of instructions is all about which God do you believe in? What kind of a God do you follow? And therefore the kind of life that you live because of the God that you're following. That's really what's at play in this. But sadly, if we look over the Christian history, ever since the day that Jesus preached that sermon, we could pull out great big chunks of time, great big chunks of people calling themselves Christians, yet by their actions you would think they know nothing of this God. Seemingly they have no concept who a loving and generous, merciful and forgiving God is. That's sadly our truth. But the God that Jesus is preaching about is forgiving, merciful, loving and kind, is abundantly good. Yet we know there are churches throughout all times that have actually believed in a very gloomy kind of God, a penny-pinching God, a kind of God who would make his primary concern was to make life difficult for people, to make salvation nearly impossible, that you would have to work and slave and strive for it. That would seemingly be the kind of God they believed in by their own actions. But this passage gives the lie to that old idea. Evident even in Jesus' day, there was a notion that, well, all gods are really sort of the same, variations on the same theme. But this God is very different. There are commonalities across many of the world's religions. Love your neighbour, sure. Be kind to those around you, yes. But love your enemy, no. You won't find that anywhere else. Bless those who curse you. You'll only find that in Jesus' words. But if everyone really believed this passage, and followed Jesus' words here, our world would have no violence, wouldn't it? Our world would have no divisions. Property and possessions wouldn't be nearly as important as making sure your neighbour was okay. Imagine if more people lived like this, took these words of Jesus seriously and applied them in their own life, who wanted to be like God in living this out. If you did that, people would stare, wouldn't they? Well, of course they did stare when Jesus did it. When Jesus led this kind of life, people stopped and they stared. Crowds gathered because wherever he went, power seemed to flow out of him. That stream just gushed up and blessed and gave and healed. His whole life was this exuberant energy of blessing and giving. Giving all that he had to the people who needed it. He spoke of what he knew from God. The extravagant love of God had been poured into his heart, and that's how he talked to people about it. That's how he called people to live generous lives as a response. And when they struck Jesus on the cheek or ripped his coat and shirt off his back, he went on loving and forgiving. He didn't just love his friends and the crowds who followed. He wept over an entire town who rejected his plea for peace. There are two astonishing things about these instructions, these simple parts of Jesus' sermon. Their simplicity. They are astonishingly simple and clear and direct and memorable. I mean, who doesn't remember love your enemies? And we remember parts of it thereafter, but we know the intent behind it. So simple. The other astonishing thing is their scarcity. I mean, how often do you see people really living like this? How many individuals do you know in your life that you've seen this being lived out? Hopefully there are some, but they're a little scarce. How many communities do you know as a whole can say we live by these, we make them the rules for our lives, the guidelines for the way that we live? I mean, has God changed? Or is it just that we've forgotten who he really is?